Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Duvall City Council of the Whole. My name is Mike Remington, council member and Mayor Pro Tem. Today is Tuesday, October 19th. The time is now 5:34. We're officially called to order. And our first item of business is good of the order. And I'd like to invite Mayor Okerlander to invite our new city administrator, Mr. Oppel.
Yes. So thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce to the community this evening our new city administrator, Mr. Kevin Oppel. He's serving on his second day with us, but I can say that from the time that council approved his contract, he's been preparing and getting ready to come in and hit the ground running, and hit the ground running he has. Just a little bit of background about Mr. Oppel. He served a career in the Navy, has a lot of interesting background that I'm sure he'd be happy to share in conversations with folks. With his last duty station being the operations manager at Naval Air Station Everett. And basically what that means is being a city manager of a large military city, interacting when you're in the jurisdiction of a port, a city, a county, and a state, which is pretty impressive and a significant challenge for anyone. His last position was in the town of Edinburgh, Pennsylvania, and I feel like we are very, very fortunate to have Mr. Oppel here with us today. He's got an excellent foundation, and we'll get up to date on the Washington state laws and regulations very quickly, as I've already seen in the last 2 days. And I hope that you all will join me in welcoming him to the city and make him feel welcome and make him feel at home, as well as any members of the community that are watching. If you see him in town, please say hi and introduce himself and give him the standard Duvall community welcome. So with that, Kevin, would you like to say a few words?
Just really excited to be here. And I'll say this at the council meeting as well, but I'm interested in the next few weeks of getting to meet each one of the council members and finding out how best to interact, what your best way of communicating is, and moving Duvall forward. It's a great community. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you.
Mayor, thank you. And Mr. Oppel, welcome on board. We had a lengthy process, and I might say a very successful one, as we feel blessed to have you here. Well, continuing with go to the order, I wanted to jump in at the beginning here just to say we have a pretty lengthy schedule tonight, agenda, and I heard from several council members that felt like we probably aren't going to get to everything. So with that, we talked about removing item 2, which is strategic planning process. Not because it's not important, but we certainly have time to work on that later, and it gives us more time for the other items this evening. But I wanted to ask council if you're okay with that. We'll go ahead and remove that item for this evening. Any objections to that, concerns? Councilmember McHenry.
Not an objection. I'm fine with that. Are you saying move it to the council meeting or just table it for tonight?
We'll table it tonight, and
okay.
Then we'll have a cow where we can really dive in and talk about it more at length.
Sounds
there
good.
were, I think, over 400 pages of materials for us to review, and I'm sure that folks get bogged down with that a bit. So with that, it looks like we'll remove item 2 from our agenda this evening, and we'll pick that up again later. Other items of interest, go to the order from council members. Or anything from staff. Not seeing any, we'll move on to our next item, which is first item, independent financial plan contract. This is one I just wanted to introduce a bit. It's had a bit of discussion, I'll call it, over the last week or so. I think a healthy discussion. We noticed that there were several questions that came up, very important questions about cost of some of these proposals. There were questions about process. And I think there was a sense that maybe this was being pushed. I had an opportunity to talk to both the mayor and Ryan about it today. And while they assured me that it wasn't being pushed, they understood that if that's the way folks felt, that's a concern. So there are really three options we have tonight. Now we're in the COW, so we're not making decisions per se. That's for a council meeting. But I think we have an opportunity to weigh in. And there are really three things I'd ask you to consider as we first look at this. One of those is that we can certainly select one of the two companies. While we ran through what I think is a fairly normal process for RFP, it was at my request that we moved it to the FAC and then moved it on to a COW, and it jumped over to a council meeting. So it's been talked about, but the concerns remain. So here's the three things that I want to bring before you tonight. One is we could certainly choose municipal analytics. We recognize now that there's kind of there's a ongoing cost if you want part of their program to continue every year. It's not insignificant amount, but we could certainly select those for a one-year contract. The mayor could go ahead and sign it and move it forward. The other option is council could say we like management partners, and we would then have to work on amending our budget, since our budget for this was $20,000. But the third option, and one that I'm going to recommend, I've been giving it a lot of thought, but listening to council members, seeing the emails, talking to the mayor and Mr. Cotton, our third option is that not just tabling it, but that we start the process over. No one normally makes you feel good having gone through a process and saying we need to start over again. But it really is quite normal for councils to say, look, we're going to reject the bids. There's enough questions here that we really need to start over. I think going back, we recognize that, council certainly wants input. And now that we have additional information, it's a little in my mind like going on vacation, where you go to Italy, you go to the Leaning Tower and you stand there and take a picture holding it up. And later you think, I probably wouldn't do that again. It was probably I'd do it differently. So I think that there's some chance here to say that we've learned some things that might help us do a better job of running through it. And so with that, the third option, and one that I recommend to you as council, is that we bring this back after the first of the year when we have time. We go back out with an RFP, and that we incorporate the things that we have learned. And this is one of those items that really is a top priority. But as I've often said, it's not urgent that we have to get it done today. And the reason I say that, the importance, of course, we all understand. This is our long-range planning for the city. This is critical for our community, and we all understand its importance. It would be nice to do it for mid-buy, but next year we're going to be starting our next biennial budget. And it's really important, I think, during that process that we have someone that can come in fairly early and be able to provide kind of that long-range view, really work closely with council and the mayor and staff. And it also gives a little bit of reprieve, if you will, for staff that have been so busy working on so many things, including mid-buy. We have our audit from the state auditor's office and all the other projects we're trying to complete this year. So those are the three options. And it really is council's choice. While I've encouraged you, I try never to tell people how to vote, but I will encourage you to consider the third item, to simply move this on to next year, and that we will reject these, both those that we've been looking at, and just go back out. I expect both will also apply, but we'll have a process, I hope, that would be something that we all have confidence in. And I do want to say I appreciate staff for their extremely hard work to try to put this together, and for council working through this, asking questions, important questions at each level. And with that, I'll turn it over to council. Questions or your thoughts as council members? Councilmember Bernicki.
Well, that was well stated, and I would be fine with the third option. We did see that the staff, including Mr. Cotton, did a really thorough job of the presentation. So we have that to start with. And again, the staff can have more time to review and consider. So I think that is a good idea, actually. So I'm supportive of that as well.
Thank you. Other council? Councilmember McHenry.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot more because it just came up at the last meeting. So, I was feeling that rush, that push. And so I think it's good at this moment to slow down, especially thinking about the level of community input and involvement we want in this process. And that was one thing that came up as a difference between the two companies. So I would like to put more thought into it on our end as well. And then going forward, if we restart the process, make sure it's very clear if that's an outcome we want to really prioritize that.
Thank you. As one council member told me after our last meeting, it just didn't feel good, and we aren't always here to make things feel good, but I think the feeling was that it just didn't feel right, the way it was finally coming forward. And I take some responsibility, or most of the responsibility, having brought it to the COW and jumped it over to council. And it just didn't go very smoothly. Other council members, your thoughts? Councilmember Hoag, and then Councilmember Schaefer.
Thank you so much for bringing this forward and bringing us some options. I should share that I did speak with our attorney today about this item, and he said he couldn't be at the COW. But I believe the process was done correctly. However, you're right, it didn't feel good to me personally. And I'm just glad that you're willing to, and I really didn't have an opinion on one company or the other. I had an opinion on process. And so maybe in the future, council needs to think about whether or not, if there's something this important to us, maybe we need to have policy that these kind of contracts get. We have policy that these contracts go through council instead of the normal process, because it was done correctly according to our attorney. But so we might want to think about that as a council. But thank you for bringing, I would be in favor of number 3. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Schaefer. I think we need to have you unmuted.
Okay,
Thank you, sir.
I also am in favor of option 3. Reason being, a couple of reasons. First of all, there was definitely concern, or not only over process, but how things were presented and kind of the non-apples to apples comparison that that we were doing, or at least that was perceived. I'm one of the council members that last time we got together, I think I nodded in favor of one proposal, but since what I've learned in the meantime is I really didn't understand a lot of the pros and cons. So I would like to get a better idea of of those things before I vote again on this, and just like the idea of a bit more time. I don't see a huge downside. Obviously, it's nice to get things done and out of the way, but on the other hand, it's probably okay waiting till the first of the year. And Mike, as you so well said, our staff has enough to do right now anyway. So all of this sounds good to me. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Councilmember Naplin or Councilmember Lenkel? Your thoughts, input?
Sure. Councilmember Langle is unmuted, so I wasn't sure if she was going to go first. I think it's a reasonable approach to start over. I learned a lot about how these financial forecasts and sustainability plans can be designed, that sometimes there's community processes, sometimes there's recommendations, other times it's just a forecast. And I think what it's brought forward is that since this is an initiative from council, And it is to advise council on our number one priority, our responsibility, which is budget making. And so we really need to be sure that when this RFP is issued, that it's what council needs and wants and expects. And then I also think, as we've done with other very important requests for proposals, that there would be council members on a selection committee and part of the scoring process, which, as has been done in the past. I think there would be better transparency, make sure that is going to meet our needs. So I really don't want to see a big delay on this. I hope we can get this reissued sooner rather than later. And, I don't want to go into the next budget cycle without a really clear understanding of our future forecast of what we can afford and can't. And so I certainly, delaying to the beginning of the year, even though it's not very much time, I mean, that means January 1, we're on it, because we have to get it done. Oh, it looks like someone's shaking their head at me. I don't know what that means, but I do think it's very critical that we get this back on our primary focus as soon as possible.
I think as we'll see later, one of our top things was, doing our budgeting and planning. And so I think it still remains a top priority. Thank you. Councilmember Lenkel, you were instrumental in bringing this to us even before you were on City Council, and had a big role in helping Mr. Cotton with the RFP language. And I think we did recognize through the process that, maybe some of the key things that council wanted weren't understood as well as they may have been. So your thoughts?
Am I the last one here? I don't see
Yes.
anybody else. Well, maybe we should just save some time and I should just go into my PowerPoint. Hopefully I can do this. Mr. Cotton, cheer me on. Let's see, where's the share screen? And let's see, how do we get to there?
So Dot, I just wanted to be clear, if you've got some information to share, certainly you're welcome to share it. But I do want to keep focused on what's on the table, which is, is this something each council member supports? We've got 3 items I brought up. Is there one of those 3 that you would support?
Well, right now I can't see how to get up the PowerPoint. So I definitely think the process has to be redone. And that's why I want to get to my PowerPoint, quite frankly. And I'm not quite sure how to do it since, let's see here. If I can, everybody's still there, right? Man, I have to go out of all these windows. Does it come
Well,
up?
while Dot's looking at that, I will say it sounds like
Can you
there
see it?
is
Can you
not
see
yet.
it?
Not
Okay.
yet. It does look like the council's desire is to move it to next year. And we understand the importance of getting it done. So what we'll look at doing, Mayor, is requesting that we restart the process. I realize that that's added work, but I think we've learned a lot, and I think that we can dive back in and we can work on the timing. I think our sense is in a budget year, the sooner we can get that done and be able to have the information will help us during our next budget process. So I realize we're just have Mr. Oppel on board, so I'll use that to just say I think we need to work with him and the mayor on timing, but certainly there's that sentiment that the sooner we can do it, the better. So Mayor, here we go. Dot, it looks like something's coming up on the screen.
Right. Okay, let's see if I can guide you all. Well, I've had a lot of time to think about this, obviously, for the last couple years. I want to correct one thing, which is what the FAC did, specific to a request from Councilmember Naplin, was to come back to the COW and ask for some direction. It was never our intent for that to move forward. And I will never understand all the reasons why, but it should have never gone forward. And I hope that's a takeaway for the future. And I also think that I'll address this at the end, but I absolutely think that certain types of professional services must have the approval of council.
Mayor Pro Tem, I'm going to call a little point of order. The council has already has come to an agreement. I don't know that further discussion at this point on this topic, on this specific RFP, is necessarily fruitful or healthy for the group.
Well,
so just would like
Mayor,
to
Mayor,
order, Mayor
please,
Pro Tem had asked earlier.
I am going to respond, please.
Well, I
Okay,
think,
I don't
so
think
that-
this is
just
going
on
to
a
take that
technical-
long, and I am scheduled.
yeah.
So I would
so-
appreciate an opportunity to finish.
Yeah, well, so Dot, I just want to be technical as well. I always appreciate it if someone calls a point of order. So that's been called, just about whether we, basically the question is, should we go into this further or should we move on? And that is, I'll leave up to council. If council chooses to continue with the slide presentation, it looks like Councilmember Lingle has 11 slides to go over. And so I will just ask council, how many council members would like to continue through the slides versus moving on? So by a show of hands, council, how many would like to move forward with the slide presentation?
Hey, Mike, I'm sorry. Can I ask Dot a question first?
Yeah, you're welcome to. It looks like the majority of council would like to just move forward. But Rick, Councilmember Schaefer, you are welcome to certainly ask Councilmember Lingle a question.
Let's see, Dot, Councilmember Lingle, how long do you think it'll take? Just to process.
Well, I don't read slides. How's that? So it can go as fast as you all can read. I don't sit here and read slides.
Okay, set that up,
well,
council.
I realize I need some explanation as well. So anyway, thank you. Please go ahead.
Thanks.
Well, we're saddled up. Councilmember Lingle, you can zip through them. Thank you.
Okay, this slide makes it, I hope makes it really clear. I'm not interested in arguing. And I hope this clip makes it clear. This is not about contracting authority, hiring partners, or me having my way, not at all. It is about process, and it's about making sure that our processes are absolutely transparent and rational for the public. So here's what it's really about. It's about us planning for the future. And you can take a look at all of this, but this is something I've repeated many times. In my view, you cannot appropriately plan for the future, whether it's utilities, roads, or adding a lot of staff, without having a financial analysis that is a deep dive. I've said that very consistently. Now, I've tried to do a little quick presentation here on what an independent financial analysis is. And I'm going to focus on two in particular, well, maybe three. It's a statistical computation. And part of what you want to do is reveal hidden factors that are not apparent. So it's not a bunch of, percentages. That is not what it is. And it's also something where you really look at not only your financial records, but your accounting practices and transactions, so you can figure out better ways to do business. And the reason I always wanted a Security and Exchange Commission regulated municipal planner is because they are prohibited by law to represent either administration or council. And there's lots of good reasons for that. But that is what a true independent financial analysis includes. Now, we had some unfortunate outcomes in this process, and I want you to think about this. And I also want to point out that this is not about what staff did. I think this is in part how the applications came forward and some choices one applicant made in particular. And it really shouldn't happen this way. When people want additional information from the city, that should be restricted to a proposers conference. Additional calls or offers for assistance to the city on other items can be viewed unfavorably. It can be viewed as a quid pro quo, whether it is or not. And we don't want things that might have the appearance of conflict of interest. And that's why it's so important that we have a very, very stringent process when it comes to anything related to money. Now, I put up a couple of definitions here because I think they're really worth remembering. When you're looking at quid pro quo, it's not about whether somebody gave you something. It has to do with expectation of favoritism in return. And you don't want that. Now, Pennsylvania, Ohio is well known for all of its inappropriate dealings, but that doesn't happen in Washington State. In the 40 years plus I've worked here, it just doesn't happen. What happens, however, is you can see people seek quid pro quo. And the difficulty with quid pro quo is it's very hard to understand when you're in the middle of a transaction. So I'm putting this definition up in particular. But I also wanted to point out conflict of interest. When you have somebody that is representing multiple interests, you definitely don't want that to be in any way permitted in your process. It raises too many questions about independence and the integrity of the research. So you definitely do not want that. You want to have very, very clear statements in your RFP around conflict of interest. Now, here's something that happens. All of us have unintended biases. Usually we think of it in terms of race or gender, how someone looks. But there's other things that are unintended biases that we are all vulnerable to. We tend to gravitate to people that are like ourselves, as the one comment is. But I think the one that is the most important to realize is that we're all a group. And so it's not uncommon to feel like you want to go along with the group. But sometimes you have something that you've identified that gets lost in the comparison of proposals because of that unintended bias. And then there's, something I've seen in planning my entire career. Somebody wants a specific outcome, everyone knows it. And so a bias develops to get to that point. And the difficulty in planning is that it can take you to a place that doesn't really work. You just started out thinking that you needed to go somewhere, but then the math doesn't ultimately really work. So that's a problem, but every one of us has an unintended bias or multiple unintended biases. And it's better to familiarize yourself about those pitfalls than end up going down one of those lanes. Now, something that's been talked about a lot is the inconsistent application of evaluation criteria. And I'm pointing this out because I think this is where we really must tighten up the RFP. In the case of municipal analytics, they had one financial plan, and then they had 3 consultancies through Charlie Francis with OpenGov. When we look at management partners, you can see they've worked all over the place in this state, and frankly, all around us: King County, Bothell, Kenmore, Redmond. So, it just, and I really have to say, I don't think we zeroed in on this discrepancy enough when we talked about the 2 proposals. And so I think we need to be very specific. If you do not have a certain level of experience with Washington law, you should not be considered a top applicant in this process. Now, here I am at the last slide, and my mistake. And the first mistake I made, I hate to say it, Mr. Remington, but I believed you. And I did everything I could to make this a collaboration. But in the end, it felt much more like a manipulation. And I think that is really an unfortunate thing. So I've got 3 quotes there, and I hope you'll take a moment and read them. I don't mind being a fact finder. In fact, I think it's my job. And I think when we stand in the way of looking at facts, we are doing the public a great injustice. We're actually doing all of ourselves a great injustice. And I think that's what happened here. And I don't quite know why. I could have my, my theories, but collaboration just did not occur in the end. It didn't matter how many pieces of information I shared with administration. It didn't matter what Mike Bailey told us. In the end, it just didn't work. So to Councilmember Naplin's point, and also to Councilmember Hoag's point, something of this magnitude really needs to have collaboration between administration and council. And it is not in the interest of Duvall to not have that collaboration and to have it very structured. And I think in the future, and this is something we've talked about in procurement, these are the kind of things that should always require council approval in the end. So that's all I have to say. And those are my observations. I don't think anybody on staff did something nefarious. I think, some of the applicant behavior was unacceptable, but that's my opinion. And I represent it that way. But I don't think staff did something wrong. I do think, intentionally, I just think that there is a lot going on in this that either people didn't understand, and maybe that's where I made my mistake. I did what I could, but it didn't work. So that's it. Now I got to figure out how to close it. How's that?
Well, thank you, Councilmember Langle. My sense is you were a bit disappointed in me that you trusted me to be collaborative.
I did.
I'm not sure.
I am very disappointed, actually.
Yeah.
Your job as Mayor Pro Tem is to help council. And it didn't happen that way this time. And I'm very disappointed. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I don't think this is the right venue to respond to that. I'm sorry you feel that way. I could talk about the fact that I was the one that worked closely with the mayor and Ryan to bring it to FAC, which was outside our normal process. The FAC, including with myself, brought it to council for discussion. I'm just, I certainly do not try in my position, and I agree 100%. I'm there to represent council, not myself. So I certainly try to do that in my life, and I'm sorry that it didn't appear that way for you, but I respect you deeply. I appreciate you providing your insight, and hopefully we'll, as we move this important topic, one of the things I think we as council feel is one of the most important things we're out to accomplish, that we'll get it right. That's what we want for our citizens and our community. Well, with that, I'd like to move forward. Mayor, if you don't mind, I think we're better off at this point to move this forward. That was our intent, and I apologize. I don't like to cut folks off, but I think it is time to move forward, Mayor. So with that, item 3 is our strategic fund discussion. This is with our finance director, Mason.
Hello, everybody. Dana Mason,
Welcome,
Finance Director.
Mason.
Yes.
Oh, I just say welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. For some reason, I thought we were canceling that one, so maybe but I can just pull up my PowerPoint real quickly, so it'll just take 1 second.
Yeah, I apologize. It was our strategic planning process, which was item 2, which we are tabling for later.
I wasn't listening very well. So, all right. Okay, let me just share my screen. All right, so hopefully you can all see this beautiful sunflower background for the strategic fund. And this is just an introduction to the concept of a strategic fund at this point in time. So the strategic fund was actually recommended by Councilmember Dowdland as a way to restrict one-time sales tax from construction revenues for use on one-time expenditures. The allocation method or determining how much sales tax from construction should be pulled from the general fund is still being determined. But once it's determined, we like to see the beginning balance with 2019, 2020 revenues using the same method. I just wanted to show you this one graph here where you can see sales tax from construction versus total sales tax for the last 12 years. So this green column is total sales tax from construction. Here, let me highlight this. And then the orange column is sales tax from construction. And then you can see here a little dip in 2020 when construction was shut down for COVID-related reasons. The potential uses for tonight, we just wanted to focus on whether council is interested in having the strategic fund, and if so, what expenditures are eligible for the uses of the fund. So possible uses are city planning initiatives like the transportation plan update, the comprehensive plan update, the shoreline master plan and sensitive area policy, parks maintenance and operations, part 1, and then part 2 being the parks and open spaces plan update, a design standard update, economic development initiatives, and a new city facility. So like I said, this is just kind of an introduction, and now it's just time for discussion.
Thank you, Director Mason. Questions, Councilmember Branicki?
Yeah, did I see new facilities on there? Does that mean City Hall?
Yes.
I mean, because if we're putting monies aside for, one-time things, obviously I'm thinking about new City Hall for years and years. So I was just wondering if some appropriation can go towards that. And I'm also curious about, when we do reserve funds and stuff, is there some sort of, I guess, metrics or measures or guidelines about how much we can set aside for reserve, that sort of thing? Or we can choose to put as much as we want in X pot?
So council could choose to restrict this specific revenue stream or a portion of it for very specific uses. So for example, the city's contingency fund, it's restricted in use in a sense that it can't be used unless council says we would like to use some of the contingency fund, but it could be used on anything. I think the idea behind this is that it's restricted for very specific one-time expenditures. I hope that answers
Mayor Okerlander.
Yes, and Councilmember Branicki and the council as a whole, this has been obviously a conversation between council administration for a long time. And so council or administration and I've been working on trying to identify what the right formula is and where the key areas are. And from our perspective, we really see this fund is getting at those things we can't get done normally, as well as the city facility. We can use all sorts of funds to build a city hall. Throwing out, putting in a government facility there is really is potentially putting some money aside for the placeholder for our next steps in the process that formalizes that this is something that we want to do as a group. The other aspects of, the original discussion that started 4 years ago about sales tax from construction is trying to find a way to segregate that sales tax that's from new construction and not baseline construction, because we have a significant amount of baseline construction. And then identifying, again, some of those things that we normally, honestly, that most of these things, Councilmember Nikki will recall, most of these items that we typically fund that you'll see later on tonight in our one-time expenses list are have historically come out of the contingency fund. And so this is actually creating a separate savings account, so to speak. And from administration's perspective, what we would like to work with council and collaborate on a final formula, as well as getting some baseline set. And we don't have to set the baselines this year. I think this year is just getting the fund going and saying we're doing this. I think we can wait till a lot of our planning processes are done to determine, the guardrails where we want to spend the money long term. But it really should be on things that are one time and that are really focused on getting us to where we need to be. I think that in general, we all know comprehensive planning, parks planning, et cetera, is really important, but we haven't been able to get to it from a staffing perspective, even when we've had budget the last 4 years. And this is a way to help get us to that point. I think that, in many conversations, there's been discussions about doing fun projects. From, I think, administration's perspective, fun projects are great, but let's get the core taken care of first before we start adding new things into the mix. For example, discussion that we had internally is, which we've not had fully, it was just a brief conversation, which is why it ended up as a light bulb idea for you guys, is we have a lot of money to build parks. We have a lot of parks coming online. We just got new parks workers, but we as a city need to make sure that Steve has the tools to know that he can maintain and operate those parks and have the funding to make it happen long term. And so from our perspective too, getting some of those key foundational documents and plans done will help guide council in better decisions long term, as well as when money's available, get to the fun stuff. So that's just a brief kind of background of the discussions we've been having internally off and on really for the last couple of years.
Thank you, Mayor. Comments or feedback from other council? Councilmember Hoag.
The slides went kind of fast. Could you read off the last slide to me? What kind of things it could be used for? Isn't that what that slide was?
I'll just share it for you.
This is just a WAG. This is just throwing things on paper. This is not an official proposal. A policy would have to be developed later.
There you go. So city planning initiatives was a big one. The parks and maintenance operation plans, design standards updates, economic development initiatives, and the new city facility. This is really just kind of seed money to just say, hey, we're headed in the right direction.
Thank you for bringing that up again. I appreciate it.
No problem. Do you want me to leave it up for a little while?
That's okay. I it just went too fast the first time. So thank you.
I think we could leave it up for a little bit. Councilmember Lingle.
Yeah, I think that doing something in this area makes total sense. A couple of observations. I think that in doing this analysis, we need to we need to have some basic estimates on the key planning initiatives that we're required to do by law. And because that really affects, I think, how much goes into the strategic fund and how much would go into the general fund, and then how much it would be potentially at risk within the general fund for those type of planning documents. The other thing I would, looking at this, is under a new city facility. I don't want us to lose track of the fact that we definitely expanded what I think will be the quality of the facility assessment that's being done by ARC architects. So we may find that work gets us a little bit ahead And so my question on the new city facility is, would this be a fund where actual pre-development could be funded from? Because the list obviously is preliminaries. So is that a possible use?
I'll defer to the mayor because she was the one that thought we should have a, some seed money for the city facility. And was that your intent, Mayor?
Seed money, but not necessarily that we'd have to use that money out of that fund. So to Councilmember Lingel's point, I think, we've got where we can't use dedicated funds to do some of that baseline work. This is a really good use of that money. So I see exactly where Councilmember Lingel's coming from. She and I are in alignment on that. Obviously, we have healthy rates, we have impact fees, we have significant bonding capacity. So based on our bonding capacity alone, if we could make sure the finances worked out, we could move forward to get a city hall process going tomorrow. Bandwidth and other things don't allow that at this point. And we want that government facilities analysis well underway to give us the information we need to do that. But absolutely, if there is something that can be that cannot be funded by dedicated funds that are existing, this is the perfect place to use that money. There are also other options for that funding. You can use fund balance, you can use contingency funds. And again, historically, a lot of our comprehensive plan and those types of things have been funded out of contingency. We've built up contingency from where it was 4 years ago to virtually nothing to the maximum statutory amount. So that's also healthy. And as you'll see later, we have very healthy fund balances in the city, despite that long-term fiscal issue that every city and county has with the sales tax and general fund at this point. Anything we can do to get that facility moving forward is a positive, and especially if we have dedicated funds out of the general fund that can, where we can't use dedicated funds from other funds to do this work is perfect.
Questions or feedback from council members? Councilmember Napland and then Councilmember Schaefer.
Yeah, I'm excited to see this come forward, and there's been some discussion on how we determine the thresholds, and I think that can continue offline. But one thing about the purpose that I proposed this fund wasn't just to set money aside, which is definitely a side effect that's wonderful. It's to protect the general fund from setting operational costs with revenues that are not ongoing. And so for me, that was the primary purpose of this, is to make it very clear that a portion of the general fund revenue is one-time money. Now, both my way of a baseline and administration's idea is not going to completely solve that problem at all. We're seeing a very huge spike in revenue in the general fund, and it's good, but it also is a dangerous situation if you start setting operational costs to a huge spike, unsustainable spike in revenue. So with that said, when we talk about potential uses, I would caution against relying on this fund for predictable expenses that we know will always come around again and again. I don't, portion of it could be funded, but to rely on this type of winning the lottery with the construction boom is not something you can count on. And so, I think we have to be very careful. The transportation plan update, comp plan update, those have to be done. Those are required. And so I think we have to be very careful to not rely too heavily on this one-time money for these things that we know are routine and will come around every so many years. Parks maintenance and operations plan, that really feels operational. I don't want to pick them apart, but in general, I think we need to be careful to not start using this for gray area things that are not completely one-time expenses. So anyway, I'm excited to see this moving forward, and yeah, I look forward to more conversations.
Thank you. Councilmember Schaefer.
Sorry, let me unmute here. First of all, I very much like the idea of this strategic. I think, as Councilmember Naplin just said, we have to be careful, how we use this. In my mind, this should be, one-time revenue and used for one-time expenses. And even in that, there may be some exceptions. However, it's important for us to be able to kind of mentally separate that one-time revenue from ongoing expenses. This fund will help us do that. Now, it's not complete. My understanding is, for instance, it will not include GFCs. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I think GFCs will continue to go, towards infrastructure costs, which that's intended to. And right now, this is strictly envisioned to be one-time construction sales revenue. Is that correct?
Yeah, you got it. It is.
Okay.
Sales tax from construction would fund this strategic fund at this point in time. That's the only revenue source.
Good. Thank you, Dana. I just want to make sure I understood that. Anyway, I think this is a great idea. I'm 100% in favor of going forward with it. Thanks.
Other comments, council? Councilmember McHenry.
Yeah, just to say thanks for bringing this forward. This is a good start, and I really appreciate all the comments by everyone else so far.
Any other comments? Well, not seeing any. This looks like something that all council members were behind. I really appreciate Councilmember Naplin helping to be the catalyst to bring it forward. I do think that we're headed in the right direction and can work out those details to make this very successful for our community. To the next item, temporary use permit. This is with Director Thomas.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and if there are any members of our community in there, I just need to bring up a presentation really quick. It's pretty short, so let me get that up. Can everybody see it?
Yes.
Okay. So again, good evening. I think you've seen me here now on a couple of occasions for this very exact same policy discussion. During the pandemic, it has been difficult for our businesses in general to do business during COVID. And we really thought we were turning a corner this year. And unfortunately, we have still a little bit, a ways to go, I guess is what I would say. And so we would like the opportunity to come back and do a redo essentially of the temporary use duration and fee and waive essentially temporary signage fees as well. We've done this for the past 2 years, although it was really partially in 2020 and then for 2021. So our existing temporary fee waivers, fee waiver and temporary use are set to expire. One has expired. So the temporary duration expired on September 2nd, and the fee waiver expires at the end of the year. And again, given that we're still in the pandemic and with the pending change with King County requiring a vaccine verification or a negative COVID test, we're starting to see movement again for outdoor areas, and we have permitted one new one because of the King County mandate. And so we'd like to go ahead and renew essentially that policy so that would allow them to have it for up to 6 months, because we do these as really as temporary and as emergencies. We can only do them in 6-month increments, and then we have to hold a public hearing. So that's why you see this again for the 3rd time, and it would be the same case for the fee waiver as well. So this is the existing language. It's in your packet as well, that we would look at being, that we would waive for, temporarily for the 6 months. So I don't know if you have any questions, but I did put the documents in your packet, so in the COW packet, just so you could see it. And what we'd like to be able to do is come back at a next meeting, at least put the agenda bill forward and draft the resolution and ordinances, allow you to review it at the next meeting, and then look towards an approval in December. Are there any questions?
Councilmember Naplan, and then Councilmember McHenry, and then Councilmember Schaefer.
Yeah, I am just wondering if this is exactly what we had done before, or are there any differences?
It is, what we're proposing essentially is to do exactly what we did before. One of the items that came up last time was making sure that we, and hopefully everybody remembers, and it was actually Council Member McHenry, if I remember correctly, that said, hey, can we make sure that we're looking at the safety of these structures? And so we do go out and do inspections once a month on these structures when they go up. So we would remain in that protocol.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry, Councilmember McHenry.
Thank you. Is this something, I can't remember, maybe you've said this before, is this something that we proactively email out to the business community to let them know this is happening? Or is this more when they contact us about the temporary use thing or a permit that they receive this information? Because I was just thinking of businesses, if they don't normally utilize something like this, maybe they would if they knew that this was happening. So I just wasn't sure what the outreach was.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I will get back to you, but honestly, I think that we're not proactively reaching out to them, but we definitely could reach out to the chamber, provide some documentation, knock on some doors, and let people know. We honestly have not seen as many temporary structures as I thought we would in comparison to other communities. And I think there's a couple reasons. Honestly, staffing is hard to come by right now. It's hard to get staff. And then just, we're a little bit smaller. We're not shutting off our, like kind of, we're right on 203, right? And so we're not like a Snohomish who is like, taking out parking and allowing structures in there. So I think we just haven't seen as much because of our unique physical constraints, but we have definitely seen an uptick in like A boards and other temporary signs. So that's kind of a good, and that's a perk because that helps them do some specialty signage over the year, and it helps our existing businesses when they're just coming in for their normal updated or upgraded temporary sign. But we can definitely reach out if we're not already doing that. Thank you. That's a really good question.
One super quick follow-up, if that's okay. I love the chamber. They're such a great community partner, but there are a lot of businesses that aren't chamber members too. And I love that you mentioned door knocking, and talking to people.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering, just even if a simple, if we have an email list of business licenses within Duvall, just sending out a blast, but totally respect if we don't want to really openly let everybody know, but just on a smaller scale if it gets too much for staff to handle. So I just was trying to think of an easier way for staff to get the word out.
I would like to say that we have an email blast list, but we do not. And that would be maybe something that we could partner with the chamber and the Rotary to try and get a shared list that we could use as a city. So that's another really good idea. Thank you.
Thanks.
Councilmember Schaefer. I think you're on mute.
Okay, thank you. It took me a second to find my mute button. Anyway, Councilmember McHenry, thank you for bringing that up. The chamber does a great job in town, as I think most of us know. However, they do not represent all of the businesses, especially some of the new businesses. I've talked to a few businesses that came to town. They're not they're not chamber members yet. They're interested. They may or may not join, but we need to get the word out to all businesses. And Director Thomas, I don't know if it would help or not, but I'd certainly be glad to knock on a few doors and try to get the word out on this, with the correct message that you might help with. But I'd be very happy to assist with that. The other thing I wanted to say is, there's been some discussion where the businesses here in Duvall have done well through the whole pandemic. There's a lot of truth to that statement. However, it's not 100% true. We have businesses that have struggled significantly, are still struggling even now. And if some signage or something else can help those, I'm all in favor of it. So anyway, thank you. But yeah, I think we should definitely extend the temporary sign no fee that we currently have.
Thank you, Councilmember Schaefer, and I will take advantage of that offer.
Yeah, be glad to. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Well, not seeing any. Thank you, Dr. Thomas.
Thank you.
We can move on to our next item, which is 2021 Council Work Plan and 2022 Vision Work. That's from myself and Mr. Cotton. Without getting into too much depth here, I think it's just so helpful now and then to run through and say, what are our top priorities? What are our values? This goes a little bit with item 2, which we took off the agenda tonight. But really, I think this is a good time, especially with Mr. Oppel on board as our new city administrator. We expect to have 1 or 2 new council members before too long. And so I think it's a good time for us, especially with the budget coming up. But I think we recognize setting a 10-year vision, being able to say, hey, what is our purpose here? Looking at, revising if need be a value statement, a mission statement. At our retreat, just a short time ago, we did go through and talk about top priorities. And so we ran through an exercise, and mostly for the public purpose, I'll read these 8 items. One was highest priority, fiscal discipline and responsibility, inclusive of fostering economic development. 2 was safety and family friendliness. 3 was transparency and accessibility, looking at electronic means for folks to access information from the city. Item 4 was limit residential growth. Item 5 was completion of the wastewater improvements. Item 6 was improved traffic and at multi-jurisdictional intersections. I think they were looking at the highway and Woodinville-Duvall Road as an example. Item 7 was foster economic development and the arts, and 8 was looking at a parks board. I think the feedback I had from some council members, they didn't quite realize maybe that we were helping during that exercise to establish some of these priorities. So I see this as kind of a building block for us to continue this discussion. In your packet, I did include 2 other items. One of those was our work plan from the beginning of the year. There were 11 items. I won't go through all 11, but it's a great chance for us to go back and just take a look and say, hey, are those still our priorities? I think you'll be pleased to see that a lot of those have been or are being accomplished. It's always nice to see when you start at the first of the year that you're actually getting things done. And then finally, we also included during the last budget process, council goals and objectives. Those were divided into 5 key areas with multiple things below. And I wanted to just share one of those because I think it's a good example of what we've worked on. One was having a responsive government was the title. There were 7 that included sustainable budget, maintain appropriate staffing levels. 2 was measurable outcomes and work plans that match priorities. That was a big thing for several council members. Item 3 was improve the use of technology and evaluate automation of systems. 4, sound financial planning and practices. 5, evaluate capital investment. 6, accessibility and engagement. And 7 was support for human resources. So you can see that just on one of the items, of the 5 items, there were a lot of things that we've already helped accomplish. So I would recommend we run through another exercise. I think at the first of the year, it might be nice to hire a consultant even to come on in and walk us through there and talk about what are our values. It seems pretty easy on the surface, but when you get into it, it can be hard work. We don't all see that the vision is the same. And so I think that helping nail that down is going to help provide a roadmap for us. I think when you include then the budget, long-range financial planning, strategic planning really helps take us off in a positive direction. It helps new council members that come on board to see that there is a direction, and every now and then we can go back and review it. So I just wanted to encourage you to take a look at those and just ask yourself as a citizen, as a council member, what are your goals and objectives? What is our vision for the city? 10 years ago, if someone said a vision, is what we have today what they envision? And so, start thinking about that for yourself personally. Where would you like us to be in 10 years? And then we can get into some of the other things, do that SWOT analysis where we can take a look and see some of the positive things we have going for us and what are some of the hurdles. Anyway, that's a big process, but I'm confident that we can work through that. And one of the things I'm excited about for us, Mr. Cotton, did you have anything to add for this goals and objectives and visioning?
Mayor Pro Tem, thank you. No, I really don't have anything to add. I think there is an opportunity with change of a new city administrator to have something like that, to make sure there's a coordination between council goals and then the strategies. And then it'll be up to the administration to develop the objectives and the tactics. So that way there can be alignment between the community's desires as expressed by elected officials and the administrative outcomes as developed by Administrator Oppel. So sometimes that involves a consultant, sometimes it's done internally, but one way or another, January is a perfect opportunity to do something like that in anticipation of future budget conversations as well. Thank you.
How many council members feel supportive of doing something around the first of the year and maybe bringing somebody in and walking through that exercise, possibly at a retreat? How many would like to do that? See a few hands up there. Feedback, questions, concerns? Councilmember McHenry.
I guess my feedback would be I want to do it, but there's something for me about validating what we're saying, those sticky dots we're putting up on different topics up on a wall. How do we validate that through the community? How do we, I think something we haven't quite ever got up and running is an annual community survey. And I know that everyone putting those dots up on the board, has Duvall's best interests at heart. And I know that we've learned a lot, that we talk to a lot of people around town and to businesses. So I feel like we have a pretty good feel of what the community wants. But I think it's important to continue to reach out to the community and make sure that we're on the right track because things do change. Now, we certainly still have priorities that have been priorities for the last 20 years, and some things really don't change. But I don't think that means we shouldn't continue to validate what we're saying through the community, through surveys. And I know that can go a little more expensive route through a consultant. In the past, we've done simple Microsoft Forms surveys. So I just wanted to make a plug for that. I don't know how that would fit into this particular thing you're talking about, but at some point, I just think it's good to continuously temperature check, involve the community in these goals and visions for Duvall.
Well, thank you for that. You're such a champion for good communication with our citizens. I think we all strive for that, but you have truly been a catalyst. I do think one of the way it fits in is perfect. One of the very first things you do is go to your community, normally through a survey or a community meeting, and just simply ask those questions. What are your goals? What do you want Duvall to look like? What are your highest priorities? And that really informs council as we develop and put those into writing and work on these items, which are, vision and mission statements. So I think it fits perfectly. Councilmember Hogue.
I didn't know I was be next. So couple things, I guess if we did have a retreat, I think it would be nice if we had someone that helped facilitate it, if it was kind of, if we had more time to talk as a council and brainstorm, I think that would be really helpful. So maybe it's just council needs to do it. I don't know, but maybe that's just my initial thought. And I do want to say that thank you for saying that this is a kind of a building block for our vision in the future, because as I looked at those dots, like the arts did not get very many dots, right? But arts really does tie into economic development as well, right? So there's things that I guess there's some things I wouldn't want to see get lost. So that's just my thought when we went through the dot exercise.
Thank you. Sometimes we take things for granted. I use my own experience. Bellevue City Council went through that, and they did quite an exercise, and it was really quite an amazing product they came up with. And after they were all done, everything was set in stone and headed towards the budget. And somebody asked, well, I don't see public safety even on there. And council just went, oh, gee, how did we? But sometimes we take it for granted, especially if things are going well. You just say, well, it's going well, So we tend to focus on those. But I think you're right. I think doing a proper exercise and making sure that we include those items like the arts that are so important to the Duvall community. Other comments or feedback? Councilmember Naplin, and then Councilmember Branicki.
So similar to the financial forecast sustainability plan, the more you look at the different plans, you realize there's a lot of differences in how they are approached and what community involvement means, even how they, create their deliverable. Some strategic plans, it's a lot of really neat slides and ideas and concepts, but do they really have a schedule of how do you implement all of these things? So designing a process is almost as important as the process itself. And I've learned that as I've looked at, some different strategic plans. And I sent a couple out. I sent a piece of the Monroe plan and a plan that Sultan had just worked on, and just very different format. So for me, I think this is another one of those things where council needs to be involved in deciding the process we want and the selection of, who's going to be a good fit for us to help us work through this if we do hire someone. So I just wanted to put that out there because you don't want to get halfway through the process and think, gosh, I wish we would have done this differently. We forgot about community involvement, or, that planning up front of how we want to go through this process is important. I don't want to drag it on and add a bunch of bureaucracy, but I do think that that we need to be careful. And I also want to put a plug in. If we do this at the beginning of the year, I don't want it to push back the financial plan further because we're going to slide this in first. I just want to throw that out there. That I do think that is a very, very high priority, because if we don't know how much money we have to spare, how can we even plan how to spend it or how to strategize what we could do? So I think that financial plan is very critical.
Well, I want to thank you, Jennifer, too, for Councilmember Naplin for sending that information out. It was so timely because I knew both these items were on the agenda. And it just seemed perfect to be able to take a look at Monroe and some others, what they've done in their planning process. I thought it dovetailed in. And if council hasn't had the opportunity to look at that information yet, I really encourage you. It's nice to see what others have done. I believe Councilmember Branicki, and then the mayor, and then Councilmember Langle. So Councilmember Branicki.
Yes, although I'm not going to be there in January, but from many years of attending retreats, I would say that, you don't do a ton of these. You only have a few chances a year. And it can be a really wonderful opportunity to, we put in some of the beautiful things into our community. New sewer treatment plant, to our Main Street, to our now parks. And I think one of the things maybe you want to make sure, visioning is fantastic and great, but also we want foundation. And we want to think about, when I work with students, for example, yeah, we do dream, but we really start with the foundation of the person. And we identify that what we need to have that vision. And so my only thing I'd say in your retreat is think about what foundationally needs to be taken care of in this city in order to reach those visions. And they're not really the most glamorous of things. It's the maintenance of the infrastructure. It's how you set up your administration and all of that. So that's my only contribution.
Thank you. Mayor Okerlander. I think we have you on mute.
I apologize. The phone automatically puts me on mute after a while compared to my computer. So I was going to defer to Mr. Oppel first. He had his hand raised as well.
Mr. Oppel.
Just, I think what's interesting that you can synthesize between some of the statements that were said is that it's great to bring things together, but you also need to bring it out to the population. And of course, there's a question about which way you do it. If you put it out to the population, then try to get their feedback and then try to synthesize it. Sometimes it's really good to try to figure out amongst the people who are elected what the great areas that they should work on. And then you have a much better survey because it's much more, I wouldn't say specific and guided, but it's more, maybe has a little bit more direction, and it helps people to choose. And you're not just saying, what things do you want in your community? Name 5. It's very hard for people to do that. But if you already have some good ideas from people who are in the community already, obviously all the council members know in general terms what people want, but then also leave an open section for it. But I think that's, to my mind, I think it does make a lot of sense to have a retreat like this, try to focus some of the ideas and then turn it into a survey or turn it into some sort of a community interaction to see if maybe they're missing something or they can really weigh in on one thing that, man, everybody really wants.
Thank you. Councilmember Lingle.
Okay. Well, one thing I was just reflecting real quick is that I think the Salton Plan was facilitated or augmented by the Livable Cities program at the University of Washington. We've talked about that before, and Director Thomas is familiar with that. So we shouldn't forget that that's a resource that's out there for us, and I suspect very affordable. And then to the point about the strategic plan, I guess a question to consider, is it just a strategic plan, or is there a second component, which is really a business plan? And in that component, I really think we need to consider the kinds of investments in the operating structure of the city over the next 5-10 years. Because we've just seen an important replacement of an accounting system, but there's going to be other types of operational infrastructure needs. And some of those will be addressed by a new facility, but some of them won't be. So I'll just throw that out as, sort of those supplemental steps. Is it a business plan? And if it's, then there's different kinds of planning that goes along with that. And then not forgetting about the operational infrastructure, which is, I think, really held us back in the last few years.
Other council members? Mayor Okerlander and then Councilmember Schaefer.
Yeah, so first of all, I love seeing the different years of priorities come together because there are some consistencies, and you can also see that there's been a lot of good work done over time. I just want to make a note and be very transparent with council regarding the next RFP for a financial plan. And that is that I cannot guarantee at this point that that can be done realistically with workload in January. OpenGov is in full swing as far as getting that going and implemented with a launch date of potentially March And that's likely to be the most busy time for finance. Any municipal financial plan needs finance involved. The other item that is also critical to being included as far as an analysis in this municipal financial plan is in fact two items: our salary survey and our workload analysis, as well as what comes out of the general facilities plan. So I'm going to be working with staff internally and Mr. Oppel to figure out realistically when appropriate times as far as staff workload goes to move forward with the next RFP. But I also want to remind the group, I've heard a lot about, and this is personal, I have heard a lot about this is a council priority. This is a joint priority of all of us, and it does require all of us to be working together on this RFP. And I want to thank Ryan and Mike for their extensive work and outreach with the council and getting all of council's questions answered over the past several months on this process. So however it turned out, what I saw internally was two very hardworking people doing everything they could to make sure that the council and the city got everything out of the RFP that we all need and want to move forward. But as far as timing on getting this done, I cannot guarantee that we're going to be able to start this process in January. And it's the workload that our folks are under is immense. And we have current understaffing. And the effects of that understaffing will not be gone by January. So I just want to be very clear and transparent operationally that starting this process over is going to be a huge lift. We all want a solid financial plan that looks for, that gets us our options for what we are at baseline, what we need for the future, and also looking at our workload and what it would take to get to ensure that we have right staffing levels. But we also need to do it well and correctly. And this reset provides an opportunity to make sure that the work that we have ongoing and have already committed to gets done and is included in that process. So stay tuned. Again, this is a mutual priority of all of us. This will help our staff. It will help council. It will help me and future mayors. And then when we get the strategic plan, that we can also work on some of those smaller pieces and implementation as well.
We had Councilmember Schaefer next, but we're down to 4 minutes. So I would like to request that we adjourn. Mayor, we would need to move our 6th item, our SBGA 2021 legislative goals to council. Can we do that?
Yep, we can do it under mayor's report. So if I've got a few items listed. If I don't get it listed, if I accidentally skip over it, Mayor Tim, please call me out so that we can discuss it.
Okay. Well, with that, I appreciate everybody's hard work at the COW. And with that, we'll be adjourned and we'll see you at 7 o'clock at our council meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.